Hey, this is Doug with Workforce Gaming. This PAX East 2024 interview is part of a larger series where I spoke with developers, producers, level designers, motion capture artists, and programmers about the games they're presenting. Today's interview is with Chapman Hammond, an eclectic composer behind some of Apogee's biggest games. We discuss how Chapman composes music for a broad range of games, from the electric, hyperviolent Turbo Overkill to the laid-back, miniaturized world of Littlelands. I'm excited to present to you our interview with Chapman Hammond.
This is Doug with Workforce Gaming. I'm with Chapman Hammond, who is a composer for Apogee Games. I just got finished playing Overkill. Really cool game, and you do the music for that. So I was curious because it feels like with the sort of boomer shooter genre, it's kind of competitive musically. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but like when people talk about the new Doom, like, oh, the music of the new Doom is really good. Yeah. With Dusk, the music in Dusk is really good. Did you feel that as like a challenge when you were doing this, or?
It was, and honestly, I didn't really want to do the Doom thing either.
Sure,
you know, it had to be high energy for sure, but I think that the cyberpunk feel lent itself to using old synths, like 80s synths.
I noticed,
which is something that I don't think Dune actually uses. And so instead of electric guitars, like really gritty electric guitars, we used big, massive synths, you know, almost like EDM party-esque kind of feelings.
Because when I saw it, because I mean, I think the tone of the game definitely feels like that sort of like driving, blah, 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 and I was expecting that, but there's like, I'm so bad at describing music.
No, it's fine.
I was just shocked. I was surprised that it's like, oh, it wasn't what I was expecting when I was expecting Doom music, and it wasn't quite that. It was like more this cyber, and there's some like quieter moments in it. It's just really cool. So
yeah, for sure. And I actually think that what you played here doesn't really lend itself well to like the whole scope of the game.
Sure.
Because the music it varies throughout.
Yeah.
So the first episode is very much synth related, synth based, and actually somewhat acoustic, like with the drums that are being used.
Yeah.
There's some electric guitars happening in the first act. Then when you reach the second act, it's a lot more electronic drums, a lot more acidic synths, like in your face aggressiveness.
Yeah.
Based on I don't want to give the story too much away, but things like it starts to crumble, get more chaotic, and the world starts to crumble apart. And then in the third act or whatever, it actually story-wise gets to a prettier place. And so we actually brought in symphony elements to the very last act. Like in conjunction with these EDM synths and the drum.
Oh, so you're building from
stuff.
Act 1 and Act 2 and Act 3, like that brings this new element, all the old. So I guess my question is, so like, how does it work as a composer? I guess, how does that sort of coordination work as a composer? So you're working with a game developer, and they're like, are they giving you, hey, this is the tone I want for Act 1, or is it something? Is it kind of a back and forth, or how does that work?
Yeah, so they gave me a lot of freedom with it, honestly. I was able to play the game while I was writing the music for it. And honestly, it's such an inspirational palette to write from.
Sure.
I didn't really need much push in the certain direction I needed to go. Up until like the final boss, where I was like, the final boss needs to be something like super different than the rest of the game.
Sure.
And so I was like, how do I do that without like doing the same thing over and over again? It had to be special. And I actually implemented a lot of like, I wasn't doing a whole ton of Skrillex-esque music throughout the whole thing. But the final boss is against an AI character.
That's
so
cool.
It's completely electronic. So there could be nothing to do with any string parts, nothing acoustic at all. So it was just straight up just electronic, like mayhem, you know.
Do you feel? I guess that's a good question. A good point. Do you feel pressured with like certain tracks in the game where you're like, I've really got to nail this track for this part? Because you talk about final boss music. I just finished Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and the final boss music was like, hey, that was incredible. Do you feel like
I did feel the pressure? I did feel the pressure, especially for the last boss for sure. Because I was following up my buddy Tim Stoney, who's also on this game as well, who did the boss battle for Maw, who's like the lead up to, he's like the final boss, I guess.
Oh, like kind of like the lead into that.
The lead into the final boss.
Cool.
And his track for that, man, it's amazing. So I had to follow that up, and he's a master of the orchestra. And so I was like, how do I do something different so I don't have to be in his shadow, basically? So
to really hard shift tracks for a second, I was like, so it's cool we're talking about Turbo Overkill, very violent game, blood and gore and stuff. And then I heard you do music for Littlelands. I think. And Littlelands, I've tried to describe for people who aren't looking at a video necessarily. more kind of like cute is not the right word, but it's like more like an Animal Crossing type aesthetic, kind of Legend of Zelda, totally different. So how as a composer do you swap? Is it simple for you to go from like, okay, I've done Turbo Overkill for 5 months and now I got to completely swap lanes? How does that work?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess being a composer, you kind of have to deal with that. You know, that's the nature of the job is you have to be open for any kind of music, you know. It's almost the exciting part of it too is I was excited to step away from the EDM stuff and step into more like quieter, peaceful stuff, way more acoustic stuff, you know, because what I do is an adventure for myself as well. It's why I love doing it, you know. Discovering new ways of writing music is such a big reason why I do what I do. And, you know, like you said, Littlelands is much more quiet. We're actually, there's not much music written for it yet. In fact, we got a deadline done like last Monday in preparation for PAX. You know, it's like we had to get these deadlines in quick, but we still have so much more music to go. But anyways, so we're still actually creating and molding the sound of Littlelands at the moment right now. Have some reference as to what we want to do. You know, of course, that Animal Crossing style, we want to have some of that. But we also thought about implementing some lo-fi elements as well. If you play the demo, you'll get to the cave track, and it's much more lo-fi than the rest of the music. So,
and I like the kind of tilt shifty look. It kind of I think like stop motion and old photographs and stuff like that. So that lo-fi aesthetic really. What's kind of like your high level when you're building for Littleland? I guess you're still working on it. Like, what's your kind of like motif that you're kind of thinking about when you're doing Littlelands?
Motif as in like theme, or?
No, sorry. I'm a guy who doesn't know like music stuff.
Yeah, it's okay.
With like Overkill, you had like this really strong idea of like, okay, because it's cyberpunk, I want to do this. Because of that setting. Is that where you're saying like, that's the acoustic and the more quiet? Quieter,
acoustic / lo-fi kind of feeling. And like I said, like we're still kind of building out the world. That's what I love about it too, is I don't actually know the full story of Littlelands. And so the music could change with that whole idea. Like at the beginning of Turbo, we thought we were just going to do like EDM kind of like big impact synth stuff for the whole game until we got more information about where the story was heading, you know, as you enter into Vector 4, which is a very celestial land, like this dystopian, like sort of perfect world where it had to be pretty, you know, like we had to make EDM music pretty. And so our music is following the stories of each of these games. We don't just want to like do like stay in one corner. We want to constantly build the music as it's going with the story. So
I do have a quick question going back to Turbo Overkill for a second. One of the things with like the aesthetic of it is like the sort of PS2 era kind of lo-fi kind of thing. But when you're talking about music, you don't really mention that as part of the motifs and that kind of thing. So are you not necessarily you're just looking at the game itself, not necessarily like what were games of the era sounding like for like are you listening to like Quake 1 music, or are you just like, no, I want to kind of treat the game as its own thing?
Well, I didn't listen to a whole ton of video game music for this. I actually listened to a lot of EDM tracks,
interesting.
like Dog Blood, Skrillex, some other ones as well, some more aggressive orchestral stuff. And I honestly, whenever I work on a game, I always pull from my like foundational favorites, and and that's a lot of like complex orchestral music, even like, I know it sounds crazy, but I even imitated some inspiration from like The Last Guardian, because that's like one of my favorite soundtracks.
Oh my God, oh my gosh, dude.
It's beautiful stuff.
No,
I would too. But because it's a foundational like favorite of mine, I'm like, I love the chord movements that Takeshi uses in his work. I want to do that myself. I want to imitate his beautiful music, you know, in a way that I like portray it. So
and you get to play around with that with different genres and all sorts.
Exactly, and that's what the beauty of it too is, like we're pulling all these really cool kind of in-depth musical theory. Like chord progressions and such into EDM music too, which is not something you hear all the time. So,
that's really cool. No, I appreciate you taking the time to talk about me. Is there any? So what are the kind of games you're working on that? Like, I guess, is there a plug for any of the games you're working on currently that are coming out soon or are already out?
Say that one more time. Sorry.
Are there any games that like? I'm giving you a chance to say like, oh, I'm working on this game. Is it Littleland, Turbo Overkill?
Yeah. So Turbo Overkill is out. It's been out since August. So that soundtrack is done. Until further notice. And then also, Littlelands is something that we're currently working on. We just started our music production within the past few weeks. You know, in preparation for PAX. And then also Bread and Fred, the DLC. I'm stoked to be working on that as well. I can't really mention much about the DLC right now.
That's fun.
But I played a little bit last night, and it's incredibly fun. Okay. So, yeah, I cannot wait for people to see it.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate
Absolutely,
the time.
man. Yeah, thank you.